Hi, hello, it's me, Jamie Unkempt Snugglepepper. I am back with another Reddit art critique. I believe art is a skill, which means it can be learned by anyone with enough time and practice. And art critiques are one of the ways in which we practice those skills. Now, disclaimer, this is nothing attacking the artist or against the artist. I asked the artist if I could do this critique as a video. They submitted their art in a art critique subreddit. The goal of this critique is to help them improve as an artist, not attack them or their skill level. So, with all of that being said, let's get into it. All right, so I have identified 4 main areas that I would say to focus on for improvement. And that is hair, hands, applying style, and removing lines. So on this portrait, you're going for a realistic style. And on this, I would apply the concept of removing lines. Isterbrack talks about this pretty frequently, and it's the dependence on line to define features rather than using the change in value. So for example, in our green, we have this line on the side of the nose, which is defining the side of the nose from the side of the face. And rather than using this little highlight, we should be using the change in value to show where the nose is. And in the case of the nose, we also have the change in saturation. So the bottom of the nose has more red because the blood is closer to the surface, which you did a really good job showing red despite having green light. Also, since our light source is coming from this direction, and it is green, that light source is the lightest anything can be. So if this is our highlight, then we'll bring the nose down just a little bit and we'll take out some of this on the edge of the cheek. We also have this line at the jawline. We can smooth that out as well. The head does cast a shadow down onto the neck, so that shadow should be sufficient in dividing the face from the neck. Also in the ear, I think it might have been cropped. The ear seems like you kind of, you know what an ear should look like, and filled in something that wasn't necessarily in the original picture. This is predominantly opinion. I would say your signature can be a little darker. What happens is rather than focusing on the piece, having it pure white brings the attention straight to your signature, where the signature really wants to be part of a piece. You don't want the first thing we see to be the signature. Also, because we have a secondary light coming in here, again, the metal will not have that full shine. Generally, with portraiture, we do want the main attention to be on the eyes. So I would leave that little bit of a highlight there. Technically, because again, we have a green light, that highlight should be, the brightest it can be is the green, because the green is the light and that's what creates the highlight. So unless your eyes are producing light, they can't be brighter than the light source on the person. So again, I think this is a really good job of using flesh tones that aren't natural flesh tones, getting this little bit of blue in here, making the lipstick marks look red even though they're really, I would say, an orangey brown. You can absolutely go in and draw to get everything in the correct place, but once you get into painting, then you want to show that there are different areas by using different values. Now, one of the things I have listed is hair, because while the face is really well done, especially using the green and the blue contrasting, the hair doesn't have a lot of detail. My guess is in the reference, this hair is just black and it's not catching any light. And rather than having it be pure black, you went in and added some highlights, not really sure where to place them. So we want to think of hair being the overall shape in the head, and then general areas. So like my hair, I have bangs, I have hair that goes down the side, I have hair in the back. Some haircuts may have like an undercut. So once we have our overall shape, we're going to break that down into smaller shapes. And what we're going to do is take that blue, and generally highlights don't go down the full strand of the hair, but rather they kind of create a band. So I'm going to put my highlights along that band rather than going down the full hair. And then as it moves this way, it's going to be catching this green light. I'm then going to concentrate my highlight in part of that band. I want to vary the size of my strokes. The nice thing, in my opinion, about having a brush that simulates hair is that you can get a little bit more variation. You can get more hair texture without necessarily drawing individual strands. However, the caveat is you do need to know how hair works without a hair type brush. I don't want to bring up the highlight too far because the shine of the hair can't be lighter than that light that's hitting it. I will also point out this eyebrow has a little bit more detail than this eyebrow. With being this close to the face, yes, going in individual strokes is effective, but generally for portraiture, I don't worry about individual strokes on the eyebrow because we're so far out, we don't notice. This little golden highlight here, I think there should be a highlight there, but I think it'd be a bit more green. So there's our before. I smoothed out some of these highlights since they were creating lines. I took out the line defining his jaw, and I added more definition to his hair. All right, so this piece, similar to the last one, we have some line going on in the face, but we'll have to zoom in for that. It looks like the original portrait was probably cropped in this area and that you added his shoulders. The problem is his neck is way too long, so there's a bone that comes down from the ear going forward, and that's where the divot of the collarbone is, and they would come down like this, and then that would be your collarbone divot. So, and then his shoulders go really far out. Unless he is a super duper bodybuilder, his shoulders probably would end a little bit sooner, probably around here. The other issue is this shadow shouldn't be there. It's hard to kind of tilt your head like this. I feel like the torso would be slightly twisted, so the middle of the pectorals would be here, and that shadow for the armpit would be in this area. Furthermore, if we have this much of a highlight on his cheekbone, we're going to see that highlight on the top of his pec muscle, on the top of his shoulder, and lightening up his neck a bit. A few areas that I would change on the face. So the lips, there's no line here. Unless you are lining your lips specifically, as in with makeup, there's not really a line to the lips. Go around like that. That little highlight is, this one back here is too far away to be seeing that much light, especially if this shadow on from his nose is that strong. This highlight, yes, does exist. This also softens our lips, and I would say yesifies them. I'm hesitant to say that. That feels unusual to say. But lips are a little bit softer. That line between the fleshy part of our face and our lips is a softer line. The lines of the nose going down to the top of the lips, that little bit is not quite so harsh. So we'll have a bit of a highlight because this turns away from the light, and then this little side returns to the light. This little highlight is kind of weird because the cheek does have a highlight there. Again, we have a line here defining the edge of the nose. So I would say there would be a bit of a shadow there. There would be a shadow as the nostril turns away from the light. This highlight typically goes about there since our light's coming from the side. I think it would go about there. This highlight right here also contradicts this shadow. If the light is highlighting his nose would be highlighted like that in order to have a highlight there. I avoid pure white and pure black, so this shadow being pure black, I would raise it up just a hair. If there's that much of a shadow, then there should also be a bit more shadow on the edge of the face. And if there is a shadow going all the way to the side of their face, I would bring in a second light to bounce off here if you wanted them to stand out more. Now the ear, so this isn't as dark. Yeah, there's a little bit of a shadow right here, but the part of the ear that comes in front like this, it's not quite that much of a difference. I wouldn't quite go pure black even for the inside of the ear, and I wouldn't go pure white. Generally the ear doesn't have the same kind of oil on it that the rest of the face does, and that's why the ear won't have quite as much shine. I mean, every once in a while the top of the ear may catch a bit of shine and get closer to that pure white. I've also noticed that this little highlight appears, so this light is generally the light that's supposed to be on the eye, not the eyelash. And so where you're putting it is technically the eyelash. I'm going to guess that's a stylistic choice. So the water, the shininess of the eye I would put down there, and then the actual highlight I would put there. Again, I don't have the reference, so I can't speak to the accuracy, the full accuracy of this. I actually learned this fairly recently, but if the highlight of your eye is here, then the opposite side of your eye is what's going to receive the most saturation. With this eye, I think what happened was you had a bit of trouble with it wrapping around because we're at 3/4, in addition to the head being tilted. The eyelid wouldn't catch that much light if it's right next to pure black, so I'm going to soften that shadow a bit. Again, I feel like these are really good portraits. I think you have a lot of good things going on. There's just kind of minor errors in understanding how light hits a subject. So I would definitely recommend keep doing portraiture, keep practicing from reference, and keep practicing hair and hands. I know that's never the fun stuff. I gave his hair a little bit more shine than what was there. Now, choosing a red background like this, so if I were working on this portrait, I would remove the background and make it gray so that I'm getting accurate reads of the values that I'm placing on the face. This is a pretty bright red to have with a black and white portrait. I think it makes it stand out, and I think it kind of works with a black and white portrait. When I make a background, I want it to be part of the piece. And this is something I've been working on personally, is that if I'm going to make a piece and I'm going to give it a background, I don't want the background to be an afterthought. I think a lot of artists fall into this category, that they draw the portrait, they feel really good about it, they kind of don't want to draw the body, they kind of don't want to draw the background, so they put something in. For a study and for a reference, I think a gray background is fine. For a portrait, I would tone down the red personally. Unless you were trying to send a specific message, I would definitely turn down the red. Now,
This one, I would definitely turn down the red. Whew, that is bright. This reminds me of when I was younger in the 90s and websites were pretty new. And so everyone had like this shade of red, also this color of type on it. It's a pretty bright background. So if you're in this case, if you're picking red to get attention, I think you got attention. It may not be the attention that you want. So I would be more discerning in why I'm picking a background and why I'm picking that color. Now, you managed to get the red in her hair, but I feel like there's only a few places where I'm seeing red, like in her skin. My next criticism would be her shoulders should be let's get a different color. I don't feel like being that cruel to y'all. Her shoulders should be a little more level. I want to say they have longer bodies in general. This is from the Avatar movie, I'm pretty sure. So a few quick notes on anatomy. I would make her shoulders more level. The breasts are a little bit lower, and especially if you don't have support, they're going to sit lower unless this wrap is like really smushing them. Also, the most of the weight is going to be in here. And then if this hip is here, then this hip should come out to there. I think they are thinner, but I don't think they're quite this thin. I would say her hip needs to be out in this area. Then we're back to hands. So when we put our hand on our hip, it is very rare that our hand sits pointing downward like this. Generally, we're going to have the fist where we're resting the knuckles on our hip and our thumb is up here resting, or we put our fingers forward. So this would be our index, middle, pointer, and ring finger, and then the hand goes behind. So one of those options would be a more natural pose. Now, with this one, I don't remember if the bottom line of this was the bottom of your screen or the bottom of the actual piece, but I would definitely extend it to at least show this hand or crop it above that elbow. Do just a bust shot rather than a half body. If you're going to cropping around the wrist and the ankles are probably not pleasing areas to crop, so I would definitely expand the canvas in order to show more or crop it shorter. I do like the effect of kind of the smudges, and I think you have a lot of really cool things going on in here. One of the things I'm going to do is turn the background gray. Yeah, I'm going to guess by your signature there was a little bit more. Okay, so now that we see her more like this, a few things that I would make note of. This color is really pretty. The texture on her skin is really pretty. I think you could do this one lineless. So I would smooth things out to remove those lines and trim down the shoulder just a hair. With the face, again, we're going with lines with the lips. So I think we could, by removing the lines, we can go in and blend the lip in a bit more. And then the corner is a bit softer. On this one, since you have a lot of top-down lighting, I would say you could absolutely do that little highlight on the nose. Now remember, if we are going to more saturated color, rather than going brown here, I would go more of a pinkish mauve. And that might be the difference between... Yeah, I think that's the red background making it look redder than it is. Yeah, I think with her face, you could definitely play around a bit more, add more dimension to it, remove some of the line work. I think like the texture on the arms, the way you incorporate the green and the blue and the purple is really interesting. I really like the beads in her hair and how you left them without the shading. I thought that was neat. There's a lot of things I like. The red background, not so much. I think you could still go with a red background, just not that bright of red. Another thing, the floof of her flower is really bright, so I would bring that down just a bit. Don't want the main focus to be on her flower, we want the main focus to be on her face. So this one, I want to talk about a few things. First, I noticed in a lot of these that you had the Procreate background, that you took a screenshot of your pieces. I would definitely say export them as a JPEG or a PNG. That way you have a better image resolution and you have it without the background. So a few things. If our light source is coming in from this direction, more than just the side of her face is going to catch the light. The inner corner of her eyes is not. Now, I love to put that shiny shimmery shade on the inner corner of my eyes. However, this shade is so bright that it would have to be its own light source to show up. The same goes for the little bit of highlight on the nose and the highlight under the nose. These highlights are from where the light catches, so they should not be there. I know this relies heavily on the jelly art style, and so in your other pieces that are more realistic, I noticed that those elements aren't there because you're using a reference. So while this happens in the jelly art style uses a top-down lighting, so it makes sense that the tip of the nose gets the highlight. This highlight is exaggerated, which is fine. But if we go in and make it grayscale, what I did was filled in a layer with black and set the layer to saturation. This is true in Procreate. We will turn it grayscale and we can toggle that on and off. We notice here that the highlight of the eyes is really bright, and we also notice that the flower is really bright. So in terms of value, our attention goes to the flower. The most change in value should happen on her and her cat friend. So behind her on the tree, we want to smooth out those values so there's not quite as much contrast. Again, the focus isn't on the tree, it's going to be on our subject. Trees are similar to hair in that we see the overall tree shape, and then we see the large groups of branches and then smaller groups of branches. So rather than painting individual leaves on the tree, we're going to want to paint the larger groupings of branches. I also took the background and darkened it, including the tree behind her, so that it reads better as she is outside, it's nighttime, and there's a single light source coming at her from the side. Unless her flower is a light source, right? Unless this is generating light, it shouldn't be pure white. So with this piece, I run into a few things. I feel like when I paint over it, it loses the jelly art style and starts to look like I painted it. And I try to keep the integrity of the style that the artist is in, so I'm not going to paint over it this time. But we will talk about a few principles. One is, if our light is coming from this direction, then on our stuffed animal, he is going to be shaded more like a sphere. So all of this would be in highlight. His nose would get more of that highlight, and he would have a darker shadow, right? So that gives him a more three-dimensional appearance. And if we go in black and white, he gets darker as he turns away from the light. It gives him a more rounded appearance. That's of course really fast and scribbly, so with more time, he would look rounder, fluffier, life would be good. With her, I think this shade is a little too desaturated. I would bring it back just a bit. So this is the original color. I would saturate it and cool it off to make this color. That's going to help the shadows recede further back. For the highlight, similar to Mr. Bear, well, I guess he's a cat. I'm bad at stuffed animals. So similar to our stuffed animal, if we have the light coming in from one side, it's going to go further on her cheek and it's going to hit the side of her nose. We're also going to see a little bit of highlight where the lip moves up and the chin, and just a hair in the forehead. Again, I feel like every time I touch this, the difference in color, saturation, hue, how I paint, I feel like I lose the integrity of the piece. On her hand, her fingers aren't going to go flat. They're going to be more rounded. So as they come over, you have one part, another part that is touching the top of the log, and then we're just going to see the very tips of her finger curve around like that. I recommend for hands, Marco Bucci has a great video talking about all the parts of hands, so I think that would greatly help. I would also say if you're going to go for line art, I am a rather sketchy artist, and so when I draw, my sketches look fairly similar to this. So when I do line art, I go in on a second layer, lower the opacity of the first layer, and that's where I go in with my nice, smooth, even lines. I find it's also helpful if I go beyond where the line is supposed to be, and then I can go in and erase it. With her hair, it's going to be more in shadow on this side. So this is going to have some of our darkest colors. And then on this side, while we're still getting a lot of the shadow, we're going to have those little bit of highlights. With curly hair, you have a lot more to pay attention to in the strands. However, the same principles apply that you want to do the overall big section of hair. I find it easiest to pick out a few strands, not individual strands of hair, but smaller locks of hair. And that will give a better representation of curly hair. So there's a couple that I'm not going to go into a lot of depth on. So this one, it looks like you had a reference and you went in and added some stickers and some stylistic elements. I would say the hand feels a little flat. I think you're shying away from some of the shading. I think there might have been a flash used, and that's why we're getting this really bright color of skin. Generally, that's more of a highlight, so we'll want to bring this down just a little. And then with the hands, adding a bit more of those core shadow and highlights, a few final details will also help. I think this one's fairly clever. I will say with the whites of the eye, you don't want it to be more saturated unless she has been crying or doing certain substances. The white of the eye, while it is not pure white, is generally desaturated. So it's going to be more towards gray. With the hair, I think the pearl opal look is really well done overall, especially on the highlight side. On the shadow side, as we move into here, since her face is turning away from the light, these colors we get progressively deeper and a little bit darker. This pure white color would darken a little bit to either a very pale blue or a pale yellow. Overall, I would say, again, my areas of focus would be hair and hands, especially doing real life references. When you're doing real life references, removing the use of lines to define the change in planes of the face or various other areas that can be better described by changes in value. We can also see that with this one, removing some of those harsher shadows, not necessarily needing to go to pure black in order to define the form. When working on personal pieces, even if we're working in a specific style, not necessarily using elements of that style where they don't apply. And I suppose, bonus tip, planning out the backgrounds as part of the piece. If she's in the tree, if it's nighttime, then we also want everything behind her to reflect that it's nighttime. That environment of being outside in the dark and having a single light source coming from the side tells a story. So we want to plan out what we want our background to be, how we want to show that it's nighttime, how we want to apply that light source.
Well, we've made it to the end of the video. Thank you for joining me this time, and I will see you in the next one. If you like this kind of comment, be sure to give a like or a comment down below, and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you never miss an upload. Until next time, bye!